All right. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the NASEO Powering Up Data Centers discussion series. We are going to get started in just another minute. We're just going to wait. There are a lot of folks joining, so we wanted to give a little bit more time. So please bear with us. Thank you. All right, good afternoon and good morning, depending on where you're from. Welcome to today's webinar on planning and siting for data center power. I'm pleased to welcome you all to the second webinar in the NASEO webinar series on the topic of powering up data centers. My name is Catherine Reed, and I serve as Senior Program Director with the National Association of State Energy Officials, also known as NASEO. Before we get started, I want to hand it over to my colleague, Kirsten Verklas, who will provide you with a little bit more background on the role of NASEO and the impetus for starting this webinar series. So Kirsten, please take it away.
Great. Thank you, Catherine. Can you hear me? Okay, perfect. It's very nice to see all of you. My name is Kirsten Verklas. I'm Senior Managing Director at NASEO. And for those of you who are not familiar with NASEO, we are the only national nonprofit association for the governor-designated energy officials from each of the 56 states, the District of Columbia, and the territories. So we serve as a resource for the state energy offices. We have a number of committees and programs, and this is a cross-cutting initiative, this data center webinar series. We have committees on buildings, electricity, finance, transportation, energy affordability. We also work on energy planning and other topics that the state energy offices work on. So we do all this to support the state energy offices also through regional dialogues and informational events where we provide platforms for the states to share their challenges and also their opportunities and their successes and build consensus. We also advance the interest of our members before Congress and the administration. And you can learn about NASEO and what our priorities are and what the state's priorities are, more importantly, at our website at naseo.org. Next slide, please. So before I turn it back over to Catherine on housekeeping, I just wanted to kind of set the stage a little bit. As Catherine mentioned, this is the second webinar in NASEO's discussion series of powering up data centers. And this series is really designed to explore specific strategies that the state and territory energy offices can use to address growing data center electricity demand, while also supporting energy affordability and grid reliability. The goal of this discussion series is really to enhance the state's understanding of the challenges and opportunities associated with data centers and to ensure that the states are better equipped to develop policies and programs to meet the energy needs in their state and propel economic development. And I think the way that we're really thinking about that at NASEO is a lot of people talk about data centers as a challenge, but we also want to stress the opportunity for economic growth and for economic development in each of the states and some of the opportunities that AI affords us in the energy sector. So this webinar today is focused on planning and siting for data center power, but we're hoping to also have future webinars that will delve into technological tools and innovation, thinking about grid and data center interactions to explore state-of-the-art energy efficient cooling options for data centers, to learn about projected innovations in chip design that would potentially lower the power use per computation, and to talk about energy security and ensure reliable and secure backup power and think a little bit about the interaction between planning and implementing data centers, as well as state energy security plans and overall comprehensive state energy planning. So there are lots of topics that we're discussing throughout the webinar series. The next one will be in May, so stay tuned for an invitation to that. If you have any topics that you would like us to explore throughout this discussion series, please don't hesitate to reach out to NASEO, Catherine, myself or Camille. So with that, I'll turn it over to Catherine to some housekeeping remarks and to get us started. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Kirsten. Next slide, please. Oh, no, sorry, this slide. Sorry. Housekeeping reminders. So just to remind you all, you're all familiar with this. This is a Zoom webinar format. So only the speakers and panelists will have camera and mic access. But please note that following the presentations and the moderated discussion, we will have an opportunity for audience Q&A. So we ask that you please use the chat function to pose your questions, and we will try to get to as many of them as possible. I will also note that this webinar is being recorded and it will be posted on the NASEO website. So if you have colleagues who are interested and had to miss today's webinar, it will be posted there. And we can at the end of the call, we can put in the chat actually where that can be found. Next slide, please. So we're super excited to have the second webinar in this webinar series, and we think we have a fantastic lineup of speakers. I'll just very briefly just go over and introduce our speakers and then let them take it from there. So first we'll hear from our moderator. We'll hear from Joe Hagerman, who serves as director with the Energy and Natural Resources Department, the Mississippi Development Authority. And he'll be providing opening remarks and as well as share his perspective from Mississippi, one of the many states facing policy decisions regarding data center growth. Next, we'll hear from Buddy Reiser, who serves as Executive Director with the Department of Economic Development in Loudoun County. So it'll be great to hear a perspective from a local government and the challenges and opportunities that they're experiencing on the front lines of data center growth in the data center alley, as they call it. So he'll talk a lot about the local siting considerations as well as the economic development considerations. Following Buddy's presentation, we'll hear from Kevin Hughes, who serves as Senior Vice President of Public Affairs with Stack Infrastructure. And he'll share with us the perspective of a data center developer, owner, and operator, and sort of getting a better understanding of load forecasting and the necessity of strategic partnerships in site selection. And finally, our final speaker will be Jacob Lucas, who serves as Vice President of Transmission System Planning with Eversource. And he'll talk a little bit about how utilities are planning for large loads, such as data centers, and how the location and siting and planning for data centers is informed by an intersection of a variety of factors. Following Jacob's presentation, Joe will then lead a moderated discussion with all the speakers. And at the end of that, we will have an audience Q&A opportunity. And we do encourage you to please put your questions into the chat. So without further ado, I'd like to go ahead and turn it over to Joe to lead our discussion. Thank you all.
All right, thank you, Catherine. So I'm Joe Hagerman. I'm the director of the Energy and Natural Resources Division at the Mississippi Development Authority. MDA is the lead economic development agency or authority for the governor. So we report directly to the governor. And the state energy office is housed within the Energy and Natural Resources Division. So I'm the state energy officer as well. That's my email address if you want to reach out to me, if you want to do business in Mississippi, if you're interested in what we got going on here in Mississippi, or if you just want to come and visit, just please email me. Next slide. So I'm going to talk about real quick, just a kind of a background on what our state energy program, obviously that NASEO helps us with every year and represents all the state energy officials. I just want to kind of give you what it traditionally manages or deals with, and then how we're changing it or transforming it to really rise or meet this new data center demand that we have in the country, right? So traditionally, our SEP program, our core funds, go to really enhancing three things: one, resiliency, reliability, and then affordability. And I've just given you kind of some snapshots of how Mississippi compares to our neighbors. So unfortunately, our resiliency is not as great as our neighbors. We're twice the national average in terms of reported outages, really due to our aging infrastructure, deferred maintenance, and then also the high frequencies of storms that hit us. Our average duration is almost 4.5 hours. That's twice the national average. So after we do get hit by a storm, our folks are without power for a long time. And then we have one of the highest energy burdens in the U.S., right, in the states. We have the fourth highest, depending on what metric or who's doing the numbers. We're anywhere between 3 and and fifth in terms of high energy burden. And the energy burden is the amount of your incomes that goes to pay for your energy expenses, right? So that's what our traditional kind of SEP program, our office tries to help manage, helps try to improve. Obviously, the influx of the bipartisan infrastructure law, those funds as they hit the utilities are really going to help us with resiliency and reliability, right? But now we also have this need for finding available capacity to continue our economic development. So, after we're managing all that stuff, now we have to manage a rise in data center usage in terms of capacity, right? So next slide. So this is a NREL map. I think it was published last week. It's a really good map. It shows you in the yellow sections there is the existing data center capacities in all the different locations. The kind of white lines, they're not roads. That's the fiber optic lines that crisscross the United States. And then the red lines and the orange lines are the transmission lines. And then the blue is the water availability where there's data reported, right? So this is a map that NREL, I think, published last week. Hopefully you can find it. It's the data center infrastructure around the continental US, right? So next slide. So I just want to zoom in. We just signed 2 really large data center deals with 2 companies, one Compass data center out of Meridian, and that's kind of east of Jackson, and then Amazon Web Services in north, kind of just barely north of Jackson, right? And really, I think we're seeing a growth in data center interest in our state because of the availability of these high-speed fiber optic lines that crisscross almost like a bullseye there right across Jackson, our availability of water, and then the availability of power. But as we sign, or capacity for power, right? As we sign more and more deals for data centers, obviously that capacity gets reduced, right? So we can't sign, an endless number of data centers. So next slide. So we've kind of developed a strategy. We have these, I really broke these down to kind of 3 kind of big buckets. I'm a civil engineer, so I'm no expert on data centers. I think we have experts in data centers here that can tell me where I'm wrong, but this is how we kind of think about projects in our office, right? We have more of these cloud data centers, kind of what I say is historical data centers. And really, we're seeing a big driver of those back here in the US, I think, because we now want to own those data centers and house that information in the US on our US soil, right? They do offer economic benefits, right, for tax revenues, but they really create few long-term jobs, right? It's not like a manufacturing plant that employs a lot of people. They employ a lot of people while they're being under construction, but long-term jobs, they're not too many, right? They do require access to that fiber that we talked about and power. And then the bigger opportunity that we see is these hyperscale data centers, like the Amazon data center that was announced here in Mississippi. They offer significant economic benefits. Again, still fewer long-term jobs in terms of or in comparison to what you see in a manufacturing location. They're really focused on those large computational tasks, like the training of the underlying models, right? And I really think the driver here is, we're kind of as a country on this international race to win artificial general intelligence or customized intelligence. We're all kind of racing for that domination of that space, right? Compared to the other countries. So it's very, very similar to the space race that, our parents were part of back in the past. And then we're also hearing a lot about transformational data centers. And I call transformational data centers that these data centers that don't play by the normal kind of power rules and utility rules that kind of govern how utilities are usually constructed, right? These people want to come in and develop their own power generation. I would say behind the meter, but there is no meter, right? They're going to generate the power and use 100% of the power for their data centers. We have not seen any of these really materialize other than people signing contracts. Obviously, they would significantly boost the economy. And so it's really co-locating power generation, to that data center park, if you would. And at first, you kind of think that's a crazy idea, right? I mean, it just sounds like a big, audacious goal to do that. And then you just think back in the past, we've actually been here before, right? During the World War II, when we had to enrich uranium out of Oak Ridge National, or out of Oak Ridge, not even National Lab yet, TVA built a lot of power plants and hydropower plants to really help develop the energy needed to enrich uranium. So we've been there before, right? So next slide. If you don't understand why we're having all this discussion on large language models and what AI is, I gave you a link here. It's a really good link. It covers NVIDIA's CES keynote, where they talk about what it means to have this tokenization of everything in today's economy and life, right? We've gotten really good at breaking down sentences and thoughts into tokens because of machine learning, because of applied math and a lot of science. And then we're able to take those tokens and predict what the output tokens would be. And those tokens allow us to convert words into thoughts, into ideas. And so really we're seeing these hyperscale data centers really kind of become factories for tokens, right? And that little image right there is generated from one of those AI models. So next slide. So as we're thinking forward now, we really talk about how do we use our SCP funds to extend what we do. Obviously, we're still going to focus on energy security, safety, reliability, also affordability, but we're also thinking about how we can use our funds to increase the capacity in our state, where we can maybe not build a power plant, we can fund energy efficiency to kind of free up those kilowatts that could then go to economic development activities, right? So energy efficiency becomes a large player in our kind of portfolio. And then we're also seeing where our office is one that's really helping policymakers here in the state understand how to deploy those new energy resources and still make sure that we retain affordability to the people in the state, right? You know, if one of these power companies, or sorry, one of these AI data centers demanded power and they built a new plant, and then maybe 2 or 3 years they disappear, then the ratepayers are stuck with that long-term cost recovery for that power plant that was built, right? So we have to make sure that all the policymakers understand that we need to make sure that you know, the people have affordable power and reliable power as we move forward, right? So that really kind of reframes how our office thinks about our activities. And again, we're here to promote economic development and make sure that economic development is sensible for all of Mississippians, right? Not just some Mississippians. So I think that's it for my slides. I think Buddy's next. Buddy?
Thanks, Joe. Really appreciate it, and honored to be here today, and love having the conversation about data centers because it has been transformational for my community. I come at it from probably a different perspective than Joe because we've been doing this. I've been doing this for 18 years now, attracting data centers to Loudoun County, and it does have a job impact. We have grown our job base by about 60,000 jobs. And I would say a good 20,000 jobs just in and around the data center industry. What we find is that for every job in the data centers, there's another 3 jobs that are created in our community, whether that is by the you know, the vendors that are working with them, or the suppliers, or the service people, HVAC, electricians, things like that. And that doesn't even count the jobs for construction. Construction has been ongoing. We haven't had a day without data center construction in Loudoun County in over 15 years. So it is a incredible impact. As you can see on our next slide here, this year we'll get about $1 billion in local tax revenue from data centers. Data centers generate 38% of our general fund, and we do it on less than 3% of the land. So you can see that it has had a major impact for where we are as a community. It took a community that when I got here, the economy was really struggling. We were 81% dependent on residential real estate. So when the housing bubble burst, we were in a lot of trouble. We lost about a third of our tax revenue, and that's why we decided to go after data centers. What does that mean to our citizens? Well, on the next slide, you're going to see that we have been able to lower our tax rate by 48 cents over the last 12 years. That's amazing. You won't find a story like this, and that's all about the data centers. The Loudoun homeowner, whose assessed value is on average about $735,000, that homeowner saves about $3,500 a year in taxes thanks to the data centers. That's real impact, and that's significant for every citizen in our community. Now, where are the data centers located? You'll see on the next slide that that is the eastern part of Loudoun County. And in the lower right of that visual is Dulles International Airport. When we first started going after data centers, we had a real idea of where we wanted them, and that was mostly up and down power corridors, and we've kind of stuck to that. The center of that map is what we call Data Center Alley, and it's a very significant density. Overall, today there's about 43 million square feet in Loudoun County of data centers, with another 6 million that's underway. We're working now to kind of maximize the remaining land that we would like to dedicate that, and have changed our legislation so that we can maximize the future of the industry here in Loudoun County. So while all that has been good, it has caused some energy challenges for us here in the county. The next slide shows with what we call the constrained area that came out in 2023. That pretty much boxes Data Center Alley. And what we found in 2023, after years and years of just assuming power would be available, is that we have started to have those constraints in that area. There's plenty of power in the rest of the county. It's just in that constrained area. Now, we've taken major steps to kind of work through that. But in that area, we have had to delay projects. The energy has never been at risk. Like, there's never been a risk of brownouts. There's never been a risk of the power going down or anything like that. But the lack of power infrastructure was really hurting us. Over the years, I've coined the phrase the abilities of power. There's availability, there's affordability, reliability, scalability, and sustainability. And all of these are important abilities. They're all really important. But what we've learned over the last couple of years is that availability has gone to the top of the stack. You know, and we also are focused, just like Joe in Mississippi, we're focused on affordability for everyone. So over the years, we've actually seen an increase in the cost going to data centers, and our residents have not had to pay any extra for the part of the infrastructure that is serving data centers. Overall, infrastructure costs for the data centers have gone up 24%, while the infrastructure cost to the residents has actually gone down 8%. So, but that is very important, and Joe is right. I mean, that's something that needs to be focused on, because while we haven't had a history of that, we want to make sure that any future costs are going to go to those who are using the power and requiring the growth of that power. So that is the constrained area. How are we dealing with the constrained area? The next slide will show you that we are adding more transmission. That is going to be a 500 kilovolt circle around Data Center Alley. That's pretty much going to future-proof us, both from a reliability and of an availability standpoint. That lower red line that connects with the purple line, that is one of our main corridors and existing corridors, that red line will be in service before the end of this calendar year. And what that has done is, once that's up, we will have no further constraints. But in order to future-proof it, we are doing a line at the yellow dotted line at the top of the map, and then we're going to connect it with that green line. And all of this should be in place by 2029. But that's a lot of infrastructure, and listen, infrastructure is not popular, and it's caused a lot of political concerns in our community. because you don't want these power corridors going down places where you hadn't intended them. You don't want to lose houses. You don't want to impact that houses. We're running power lines down Route 7 on that yellow line at the top where we had never intended power lines to go down. So it is something that you really have to plan for. It's something you have to think through, and it's something that you have to really understand, what is that impact? We've had a great positive impact from data centers. You can't really even, think about how $1 billion in local revenue out of a $3.5 billion budget is going to really change the game for us. While most communities in Northern Virginia are raising taxes or have shortages, we're lowering taxes again 6 cents this year, and we're going to have about $250 million in excess revenue surplus at the end of the year. So it's been a very good thing for us. And my contact information is on this final slide. And you can either scan that or jot down. And if I can do anything to help with this conversation, I'll be more than happy to. And with that, thanks for this opportunity, and I'll turn it over to my friend Kevin.
Great. Thanks, buddy. And thanks, Joe. You can flip to the next slide. I'm going to just have one slide, and maybe it tells enough of the story, and then I'll voice over it. But first, just on Buddy's job comment, I actually, in 2009, was not sure what I was going to do for a living. I ran across a company who was looking to hire, quote unquote, bodies to get work done in a data center. I signed up for it not knowing what a data center was, because it paid well and had a lot of hours. 16 years later, that's become my whole career. So there is a ton of opportunity there. So thanks so much for having me today. I'm thrilled to join and join this great panel of individuals and have the opportunity to speak to folks at NASEO. I'm going to talk a little bit about Stack. And I'm going to talk a little bit about utility partnerships and site selection. But before I hop in, I'm Stack's SVP of Public Affairs. So we cover government relations, economic development, community engagement, and strategic communications. My team is across North America. And we've got in our role in this kind of stage of where the industry is at. I think that business and public affairs really go hand in hand. And so it's been a very exciting time over the past couple of years to see this industry just continue to grow in prominence. And at one point, nobody wanted to talk data centers. Now everybody wants to talk data centers, which I think is great. I also have have had the opportunity to, in addition to my role at Stack, serve on the executive committee for the board of directors for the Data Center Coalition, which is really our industry's primary trade association across the U.S. And so they do local, state, and federal advocacy and a range of other kind of subject areas that they own. Also, a lot of our utility engagement from an industry to industry perspective. And I also chair their policy council. So great organization also to, I think as members of NASEO are kind of trying to learn more. I think the folks on this panel, but also that trade association is a great group to reach out to learn more. So let's talk about Stack. So you can see my evolution timeline is not 2,000 years, it's 6. Stack is a relatively young company, but what you'll find in the data center industry is that most of us are relatively young, with maybe some of our older companies dating back to the early 90s. But what you see represented here was in 2019, Stack Infrastructure, which is a data center developer, owner, and operator, was founded. We are wholly owned by a private equity group called Blue Owl. We were previously owned by a group called IPI, but Blue Owl acquired IPI in January. And what we've done in 6 years is go from a company in 6 markets with 8 data centers and grow to a company in 23 markets with 44 data centers operational. And then with a development pipeline of, in addition to our 44 data centers, we have a total capacity of 4 gigawatts that's either built or under development. And when I say that number, there are a lot of big numbers that you will see these days. That's our high certainty real number. That is commercialized data center real estate is a way to think about that, right? So that is a very large number, and this is not something that is still aspirational. This is something that I have a contract that I have to deliver against. In addition to that 4 gigawatts, we also have 6 gigawatts that is planned potential development. This is where we are in the phases of early business interest, where we may not necessarily have purchased the property or signed specific high-cost contracts with utilities or reached certain milestones. But these are all project opportunities that we have advanced in our development pipeline to a place where they're becoming more real. And I just like to articulate that because there's a lot more nuance here than just like big number, big number, big number, right? And especially in a growth time like we're in right now, I think it's important to kind of highlight some of the differentiation of what numbers are have a greater certainty of arriving and what don't. So I like to do that just at least from the stack perspective. But either way, those are very, very large numbers. Let me try to give a translation for that too, because I work with a lot of folks in a lot of different industries, and unless you're a utility who thinks about power in a very specific way, you're like, what does this mean? What is this metric? So I'll give you an example. So for Stack, our basis of design data center, this is the kind of, it's like if you've ever been to a barber and you're like, I'll take haircut number 3, like that is our off-the-shelf data center that we build. That is a 2-story, 250,000 square foot, 50 gross megawatt facility. And I say gross megawatt because that is the total power requirements for the facility. About 36 megawatts of that will be for IT purposes, which are specifically the computers or servers in the facility. So 50 megawatts, 250,000 square feet. So I think square feet are a little more familiar for folks. That's what that looks like for Stack. That is not our only product that we build. And there's a diversity of products out there that are proprietary to some companies. But I just thought I'd give a little bit of a North Star on scale by talking about that. So that's where we've grown to today. Our major markets in the U.S. include, Virginia and Texas and Arizona, California, Oregon, Illinois, Georgia. So a lot of the more typically kind of talked about markets. We're also in Ohio. But I think what's really interesting right now and really kind of evident of that is with Joe kicking this off, the significance of new revived interest in more markets. I think it's incredible, the activity that we've seen in Mississippi. I think that there are a number of new markets that are really coming to the table, becoming party to investment and growth for this digital infrastructure. So I'm really excited about that, and I think the 30 plus data center companies that are out there are going to leave no stone left unturned when it comes to site selection. And could be a nascent market today, it could be a major market tomorrow. So I think there's a lot of opportunity out there right now. Before I jump into utility partnership and site selection, though, I do just want to double click on some of the things that Joe and Buddy spoke about on the economic impact side. I mean, first, I think Buddy said availability of power is the priority right now, and I think that that's right. The reality is there's a lot of pressure to meet this moment. What we're building here, whether you are a data center developer or you are a utility providing power or you are a supplier, putting manufacturing medium voltage transformers, you are right now kind of in the spotlight for helping to meet what we see as, the infrastructure of the 21st century that is critical to our national and economic security in the U.S. And so speed is a priority in this, in addition to all of the other abilities, because we're in a competition, which means we are in a race. I think Joe put it well, like we are in a race, and speed has a massive advantage, and sometimes a compounding advantage. So there's a lot of pressure for us to move quickly. And so, that's not just for the, kind of macro strategic economic and national security, but, and that's of the future. A lot of this is just value and economic impact right now. So our trade association worked with PricewaterhouseCoopers to do a nationwide economic impact study of the data center industry. And there are just a couple of numbers I want to share here. So through direct, indirect, and induced jobs from the data center industry, they found that between 2.9 and 3.5 million jobs in the US are supported annually by this industry. So take that, direct job figure, and as Buddy rightly pointed out, the multiplier effect it has for the supporting jobs around them. The true employment story here is actually, I think, incredible. And look, I'm an economic developer. Sometimes I talk too much about the jobs I count for an incentive and not enough about all the jobs that are really there from the activity. And so, there is tremendous employment value to this industry, and that's also represented not just in jobs, but in labor income. So what our report also found was that on average, between $209 and $294 billion of are paid in labor are made in labor income from this industry annually. That is a massive figure. And what we also found was that this industry drives between $355 and $486 billion in annual GDP contributions. Right. So this is infrastructure that drives economic and employment value across the country. And as Buddy pointed out, the tremendous local economic value that arrives when the industry invests. There is state value as well. I think what's interesting is that for my tenure working in data centers, competition between states has often kind of revolved around incentivizing site selection by exempting sales and use tax for very expensive server equipment and particular components for a data center facility. Today, over 30 states offer some form of sales and use tax exemption for data centers. That's because, much like manufacturing, the equipment is incredibly expensive. So that has tremendous value to attraction. But unlike manufacturing, you don't have to buy this once every 25 years. You can buy this every 3, 5, or 7 years. And so the value is incredible. But one of the conversations has been, well, what's the economic, what's the tax value to the state? We recently did a study in Georgia to help answer this question. And what we found was that Georgia actually sees more than $1 billion as a state in tax revenue from data centers. And a significant portion of that is actually through sales tax on energy. And so, there's that tax value at the local level and at the state level from this industry. So, I wanted to hit all that because, it's a great industry to bring anywhere. So we, because of the economic value. So let's talk a little bit about utility partnerships and site selection, and then I'll turn it over to the next speaker. So what's interesting, and Buddy referenced the service constraint for Dominion in Eastern Loudoun County from a couple of years ago. And I think that moment was if you're to write the history books for this industry, there's going to be a several chapters attributed to that moment. And I think what was really interesting in that was a realization of how many large load customers of utilities were really in more of a kind of provider customer dynamic with the utility versus where I think we've moved to today, which is more about partnership and strategic partnership. Because what we learned a lot in that moment was transparency and communication probably could have helped a lot in a lot of ways. What do customers really need and when do they really need it? How were utilities, and not just our retail service provider, but our transmission provider and our grid operator, like how was everybody thinking about these load requests? Because from my perspective where I sit, I want things fast. I also want things to arrive when I'm told they'll arrive, even if it's later than I wanted them to arrive. So there's a lot of value in developing the relationships and partnerships between a large load customer like a data center and a utility. And I think from a staff perspective, at least, that has become the number one priority for our company. So what we try to do in every market that we're in or want to go into is take time to sit down with utilities, not just at the account manager level, but also with executives to take that moment to just say, let's just all assume we don't know anything about each other and start from there. We can talk about our business models, how we think about things, how we think about our markets, our customers, our partners, all of that, and really start from scratch because everywhere you go, it's a little bit different. And not just for the utilities, but also for the data centers. My customers change based on the market I'm in. I may have airlines and insurance companies in one market. I may have cloud companies in another. I may have banks in another. I may have AI in another. And everything is different for me too. I have different designs. I have different, operational profiles. So, just on the utility partnership front, I think that it is essential that the large load customer is willing to sit down with the utility in a strategic partnership environment and kind of just talk through things pretty frankly. And I often see, especially when entering with a large investment into a new jurisdiction, it's incredibly valuable to be able to partner with the state and the locality in those conversations as well. Not everybody has to see everything, but at a minimum, I think it's essential that those kind of in-depth conversations are happening. So main kind of thing there is for me with utility relationships, it is not a provider-client relationship, it is a partner relationship because if I am successful, that's great for me. But if I'm successful, it's also great for the utility. We drive large capital investment into significant utility infrastructure, which is very valuable to the utilities, and actually can bring a lot of value to other customers and future growth on the grid as well. So that's kind of my quick take on data center and utility partnerships. So in the last minute here, and sorry, Catherine, if I'm running over, but I just want to add one note on site selection. I think Joe's map hit this well, which is, the conversation is power today. And, there is the traditional list, right? You need, the right type of land to develop. You need a workforce. You need access to transportation. You need a favorable tax and business environment. But frankly, it is very useful to have water as well. You have real technical trade-offs in what you're able to do if you have no access to water. Now, our basis of design for our cooling technology is a waterless design, which works well for the broadest set of our class of clients. But it is really valuable to us still to have the optionality of using some water source for industrial cooling, because that gives me a broader set of tools that I can bring to the table for technology solutions to meet kind of dynamic needs of my clients. So I do value that very highly. But I will add one note on it, which is what we found is that It's never just one or the other, where there's water or there isn't water. One thing that we are pushing very hard for and are involved in multiple projects around when it comes to using water for industrial cooling is access to treated wastewater for a reuse water system. This is something actually Loudoun County, I believe, has more than 50 data centers connected to their system. What we're really taking is the wastewater coming from homes and other businesses that is being treated and then discharged into waterways because it is clean enough to discharge, but not clean enough to drink. We're repurposing that to industrial cooling. We're not introducing anything to it. After we use it, we actually send it back to the same wastewater treatment facility where it can either then be discharged or remixed with the rest of the treated wastewater and recirculated for industrial cooling. So I just note that because sometimes large population centers can generate the water needed for industrial cooling without necessarily having access to new potable water supply. So I will stop there because, like I think I said earlier, I could probably talk a lot longer, and I will turn it over.
Thanks, Kevin. My name is Jacob Lucas. I'm the Vice President of Transmission System Planning at Eversource. I'm requesting access here to share some of my slides, but I'll just start right out. So Kevin, you set me up perfectly there. So there's going to be, it's almost like we planned this. You're going to hear two key themes kind of that Kevin teed up for me there. And those were essentially new markets, but also just the viewing the large load interconnection customer and utility relationship as kind of a strategic partnership. So totally agree with that. And I'll just start right here at the outset and say in your agenda, it refers to my part of the presentation as a utilities perspective. Really like that framing because if I've learned anything in this space of large load hyperscale data center interconnections from the utilities is the regional differences are real. And so I'm coming to you today from a New England perspective. So could I just get a confirmation you can see my slides and then I'll continue? Yeah, all right. So Eversource is New England's largest energy provider with just over 4 million customers. Our main states that we serve are Connecticut, Massachusetts, and New Hampshire. And that is electric, gas, and water. Eversource roughly owns and operates 50%, so roughly half of New England's electric transmission system, which translates into just about 4,500 circuit miles. And the voltages we have in New England are 115,000 volts up to 345,000 volts. So that's another key difference that you might hear in other areas of the countries. Eversource does have its own goal to be carbon neutral by 2030. And this last bullet here on this slide, we do own, our states in New England have had some legislation that has allowed us to build and own and operate generation. So because of preferred resources, right? And so we're kind of coming full circle here. Obviously, New England, deregulated way back, and so we have not been in the generation business. But we got into the offshore wind business that we were helping to build out through a partnership with Ørsted, and we brought online South Fork offshore wind, and then two others we're working on, Sunrise and Revolution. And now we do own and operate 70 megawatts of solar in Massachusetts. This just the point of this last bullet. Even though it's changed from offshore wind to solar, is just to demonstrate that Eversource is committed to helping our states achieve their clean energy goals. So I'm going to emphasize this point here about how the regional differences are real when we talk about data centers. We are not all like Loudoun County. Now, obviously, several, and there's an important point here that I'm going to try to drive home. But obviously, reading through NERC's, North American Electric Reliability Corporation's long-term reliability assessment, you can see this clearly. That's the bottom in the lower left. But the build out of data centers is not universal or equal across the regions, across the nation. And so here in New England, we do not have any large-scale hyperscale data centers that have interconnected to the transmission system yet, but the interconnection requests have increased exponentially. But what does Eversource have? So I mean, what does New England have? So if we're not leading if we're not on the bleeding edge of data center proliferation, I'll tell you what, electrification is real for our region. And so it's important to kind of highlight here that we already were viewing New England as transitioning from a summer. Currently our electric peak occurs in the summer. In 2006, we hit our all-time historic peak at just around 25 gigawatts. So that's a good number to have in your head as I'm kind of going through some other numbers. But just New England, historically all-time peak, 25 gigawatts. Now, because of load energy efficiency measures and other things, our load's actually gone down a little bit. It's actually more around 22 gigawatts now, but we'll just use the 25 number because it's round. And where are we going though? So already in our long-term load forecasts on the electric side, we have already pulled in adoption for electrification, both in the transportation sector and the heating sector. And that by itself is driving not only a switch of New England becoming a winter peaking system by all accounts in roughly the 2035 timeframe. That winter peak will have increased from the historical all-time of 25 gigawatts to around 40 gigawatts. And fast forward all the way to 2050, and this isn't even the fully electrified scenario, this is more of an all options kind of scenario, it's expected that New England's electric load is going to double, 25 to 50 gigawatts by 2050. And so why is that important? And so you already heard it touched on a little bit on this webinar, but many of the studies, and I'll go into some of the studies that we perform for data centers here in a second, are looking at transmission adequacy. And you heard about it on Buddy's slide in terms of the PJM there around Loudoun County, adding some new transmission capacity for interconnecting these large loads. That's fine. There's another really important factor here though, and especially in areas like New England where we already have a winter energy security issue, and that is essentially, it's referred to as resource adequacy, but essentially it's sufficient generation to meet electric load. And I bring that up because if New England is already anticipating to double its load by 2050 due to electrification, right? We need to be really conscientious about what happens when we add on top of, new loads like large step loads, like large data centers. And so I'll just touch on a couple things that Eversource is working on now, because we're trying to stay out ahead of this wave that we see coming. And these are not meant to be barriers. It's not what I'm saying, but we are trying to learn from other areas of the country. Hey, what are you all seeing? What can we do proactively to kind of help facilitate the interconnection of these facilities? And so, yes, the long-term electric load forecast process that we have today, both at an independent system operator of New England, so the regional ISO's perspective, as well as our own local transmission owner load forecasts, we do not currently include large step loads like hyperscale data centers. This is absolutely something that is on our radar, and there are various key initiatives that are going on right now to figure out how to go about pulling that into our load forecasts. But right now, we do have roughly 5 gigawatts of data centers that are requesting to interconnect to Eversource's transmission system in New England. So back to that new markets aspect that you heard from Kevin earlier, it's like, we've kind of been seeing this coming for New England. Obviously, New England historically has had high energy prices, et cetera. And so it's not surprising for various factors. Property can be expensive in New England, et cetera. And so, okay, that's fine. But this has all happened in, let's say, 18 months to 2, in terms of the 5 gigawatts of requests that we have ongoing right now today. We had 0 as recent as maybe 2 years ago. And so it feels like we're on that exponential curve right now, because probably 2 or 3 gigawatts of that 5 gigawatts has probably happened in the last few months, requested interconnect in the last few months. So we're seeing a lot of activity. Fine. And like I said, all of those studies are looking at transmission adequacy. And the good news for New England is New England is a very tight system. And so it's highly networked, highly integrated, and we're actually not seeing a lot of needs for transmission for the various studies that we've been looking at on this. So that's the good news. Now, eventually, of course, and of course, this is highly dependent on where the data center site is in relation to the nearest electric substation or nearest electric transmission line. But putting all that aside, that's kind of the good news. Now, we do not perform resource adequacy, generation adequacy planning study for these interconnection requests. There's a whole lot of reasons for that I don't have time to go into. And Catherine, I'm going to try to catch us up on time a little bit here, but we don't do that for these interconnection studies. But as we have other forums where we're exploring New England's historical winter energy security concerns, remember, and I'll try to do this quickly, but remember, New England, we're kind of at the end of the natural gas transmission pipes, gets very cold. And so what happens often in really, really cold snaps in New England, we'll see our electric generators. A lot of the gas will get diverted to home heat, residential heating, and we'll see a lot of the electric generators actually switching to oil because it's actually cheaper for them to do so. And so, that has its own challenges associated with it, which ones can even successfully make that switch, et cetera. And so we have a real winter energy security concern in New England. And the point is now we are, to the extent these large hyperscale data centers interconnect, we are layering that new load kind of on top of those winter energy security. So this is something we're being very thoughtful about in those other forums, though. And then also, I think it was touched on earlier, but in January 2025, NERC did issue a NERC alert that was essentially related to 230,000 volt electric transmission line fault that essentially resulted in about 1.5 gigawatts of highly voltage sensitive loads tripping offline. So as we see these sorts of things happen, again, not problems. It's just we need to add new contingencies that we evaluate on a transmission planning horizon. This is what transmission planners do for a living: is what scenarios do we need to be evaluating, what scenarios are important for our regions, because obviously we need to maintain reliability 10 plus years out. And so we're already looking at frequency stabilization as well, and to the extent power quality is another issue. We have a lot of harmonics in our system, and so these nonlinear loads essentially compound those. And so we're doing a lot of research, a lot of fact finding into what's really happening in the other regions. Again, not to present any barriers, but just so we can kind of get out ahead of this. And I will just say we are standing up a new, but we do believe in this. And it's in terms of being the solution provider for these new hyperscale data centers and interconnected in your system. And it's not really because Eversource stands to profit from these. We obviously had rate decoupling over a decade ago now. And so, we don't, how much the meter is spinning is not of importance to us from a revenue perspective, but also historically interconnection customers, while they have usually been on the generation side, it's like a plug and play situation in New England where you just pay for the interconnection facilities, and then to the extent there are any network upgrades, those as well, but usually those are paid for at cost. And so for Eversource as a electric transmission owner, electric distribution company, for us this is really about we see a lot of our communities signing these host community agreements with these developers, and we just want to help. That's really what all this is. And a lot of these developers, from what we've seen, have not been familiar with the New England grid, the New England process. The process can vary a lot. And so what's Eversource trying to do as a utility? We're trying to help these developers understand the process. And to the extent the regional process might not be as flexible in terms of being able to use operating schedules, et cetera, we have tailored our process to be as flexible as possible. And so we put a bunch of information on our website, and we try to streamline that process to try to help as much as possible. And of course, we're watching industry trends as well. So that is my final slide, and I will turn it back over. Looking forward to the moderated discussion. Thank you so much.
All right, great. Thanks, Jacob. Thanks for that very enlightening discussion. So I'm going to start with some questions, just have a facilitated discussion. I'll start with Buddy first, so Jacob and Kevin can have a little breather. But Buddy, you probably like me are getting over the state legislative season right now. And I was just wondering, how are state local policies driving data center planning, siting growth, right? And have you seen any new policies pop up that may help you or hinder you as you go forward?
Yeah, well, I mean, for us, we're kind of at the end. Like if data centers in general are in the third inning, we're probably in the seventh inning stretch. So we don't have that much more to go in Loudoun County. But across Virginia, there's still great opportunity, and we're seeing that growth across the Commonwealth. I believe there were 36, Kevin can correct me, 36 bills that were introduced in the legislature this year. And frankly, most of them were not supportive of data centers. None really passed. So, but that doesn't, mean that they won't in the future. There are some things that we are very supportive of. The allotment of the digital infrastructure that has to be built, electrical infrastructure that has to be built to the data center industry. I think the industry and the county very supportive of that. Some things around siting and things like that. I believe that should be on the local jurisdictions, and that the state should not make decisions or create legislation that would impact that. We've also done some things on the local level that kind of clarify exactly where we want them and how we want them to happen. We have run into instances here where the data centers are too close to homes, and we've run into instances where homes are too close to data centers. You're seeing it both ways. But that's what happens when you're in a growing community where we're growing by 15,000 residents a year, and we're growing our commercial tax base by, tripled it, about 33% year over year. So, there's going to be natural conflict there. But I think that, people in the legislature are trying to get their arms around what does the future of the industry look like, and how do we make sure it looks right for the Commonwealth.
Great. So I assume that, for us state officials, maybe educating our legislatures would be a wise decision to do. So great. Thanks for that question or that answer. So this next one's going to use Jacob. In what ways are data centers prompting a change in the traditional relationship between large loads and utilities? I mean, you kind of alluded that into some of your discussion, but obviously these data center loads are not your typical steel plant, right? So what kind of different thinking are the utilities having to wrestle with?
Joe, thank you so much for the question. And I'd actually be interested to kind of, after, Kevin, feel free to weigh in from the customer's perspective here as well. But what I'll say is, just right at the outset for us in New England, in terms of this change in traditional relationships, right? So for many years, I'll say, there simply were no requests to interconnect large loads to our transmission system. Now, maybe one in a decade or so. Right? I mean, so there was a couple, but this has essentially prompted us to entirely create, or at least recreate from decades old process. And so that's for one, is just recognizing that there is a need that utilities need to serve here. And then the second thing I was trying to say is we really wanted to be smart about it. So another thing we're exploring and we're trying to do is, so obviously distributed energy, solar PV growth, solar photovoltaic growth in New England. I do think that was one of the things that we were kind of on the front edge of. And so, something like hosting capacity maps for DERs is something that we've had now for many, many, many years. And so we're thinking, hey, should we create something like that for large load interconnection requests? Because that seemed to really help with the solar DER and continues to help with solar DER growth. And so that's another example of why we're trying to really be proactive and provide new information. And then the other thing I did say, though, is, look, I do this for a living, and the interconnection process is still hard for me to understand. And so I can only imagine what it would be like for a customer. And so to the extent that even some of these large load interconnection requests do want to go through the regional process, we're trying to be advisors in that capacity as well. And so really, it's a multi-prong approach, but it did start as, because the other thing I'll say is, studying loads, single point loads of this size, especially in a region that New England, for example, I won't go into it, but we do very, very complex interconnection studies in New England. They're called electromagnetic transient studies. These studies can take a while. And so that's kind of the other compounding factor that I think some of our developers for New England, are surprised about, is how long these studies take. And so really, we're exploring how to insert new milestones in that study process so that we don't go off in a vacuum and take 10 months and then kind of come back with a final study and potentially have like astronomically high upgrades. It's like there'll be check-ins along the way, because so far there've kind of been some developers that have kind of just been interested in more of a go no go type of decision at the outset, and so we're definitely doing some of that as well. So we're really, like I said, multi-pronged. We're trying to do whatever we can to make the process work well, especially when there really wasn't a process and we're having to kind of create this.
Great. And then, so Kevin, what is your kind of answer to the question of?
Yeah, and I think it's great. It's a great question, and appreciate Jacob's comments. I think a couple of things that I'll add in there. I think on the additional detail side, like really on the interconnection request and the studies that follow, what we found, and just in talking with some large grid operators that are across multiple states and many utilities, really helps when there is a sophisticated request that can help model a little bit of standardization of like, what are the inputs to help a utility in understanding what this large load is actually going to look like and when it's actually going to arrive. So, one kind of simple sniff test, in my opinion, if somebody says that they need 100% of their request day one, that's not real, right? Because that's just not how the world works. I can't roll enough servers up in one day due to congestion on highways, to make that real. So load ramps, how much and how fast and over what period of time, phases of development. These are really important inputs that can really help in that planning and forecasting portion. That, in my opinion, at least from my company's perspective, are table stakes at the request stage. You got to give at least a version of it, even if it can change a little bit down the line, and it will change. You need to be able to help provide some of that. I'll also add, and this goes a little bit to some of the political concerns. There's an issue, there's a concern on the utility side, and there's a concern on the rest of customer side around cost. So nobody wants to overbuild something that then everybody else is going to have to pay for because a request came in that didn't materialize. Now, sometimes that just happens. Like that could be anything. You could be a large manufacturer, refrigeration site, something like that. But a couple of notes I'll say is that as development of data centers mature through the process, milestones where there's real quote unquote skin in the game matters. So what I found is that the moment you have to procure long lead equipment, those are big checks, and those are big conversations. Your certainty of interconnection has gone a lot higher once procurement agreements are signed at that stage. And I think what's interesting that we found is in Virginia, Arizona, I think Georgia now, on the concern of is this large load growth causing costs for other customers to rise? The resounding answer has been no. Data centers are paying their fair share is the refrain right now. But then the next follow on is let's make sure they continue to do so. And so from a educating policymakers and partnering with utilities perspective, it's like, let's engage in the process to make sure, our future tariffs are properly designed to kind of meet, what today's customers are looking like. And then just last note, partnership side, reliability. Jacob, I'm glad you mentioned that event and the NERC write-up on it. I joined a NERC's large load task force last week, talking about collaboratively how to come up with some standards to help disseminate, to help understand events like that and best practices moving forward. What I love about that event is that it feels like everything worked right, but the utility and the customer hadn't communicated on what they were doing in those events necessarily. And so like my automatic transfer switch is too sensitive. And so I disappear. And then also we didn't talk about how I'm going to come back and when and how much. And then, oh, by the way, 20 of my competitors had the same issue. And that's what added up to this big thing. So communication and, thought sharing is really useful to those events, especially ahead of time rather than after the fact.
Great. All right. Well, thanks for that. And so, Buddy, now back to you. We've heard a lot that when you're planning or siting a data center, we need, of course, the physical infrastructure like power lines, generation, and fiber. But there's other needs like water, economic development, incentives, local community, engagement, and then also this just real understanding of affordability. What are some of the things that y'all think through as you kind of wrestle with that? And what is your advice as others deal with that too?
Yeah, the thing I tell people when I consult, across the world, define your opportunity up front. Understand where you want them, how much you want, and how you want them to be implemented. Because we kind of have had to be a little more reactive because the industry grew so fast here. So we have some campuses in places where we didn't necessarily want them to be. Uh, Incentives, we've not given any local incentives at all. There is the state sales tax incentive, which we were one of the first to have, that now over 30 states have. That's important. I think that's table stakes. I think you have to do that. But then, we did want our data centers to be in energy corridors. We've done a pretty good job of that. We have, a majority, not a majority, but many of our data centers on reclaimed water, as Kevin mentioned. That was important to us, and we're looking to even expand that to a larger portion of the county. And then, what is the impact? What is the impact for the residents? What is the impact for historical and environmental things? So, I think taking a more comprehensive look at siting is really important because, at the end of the day, we want this to be a thriving industry, and we want it to be well incorporated into the communities in which we live.
That's great. Great answer. All right. So the next question is for Kevin and maybe Jacob too, since y'all tag team the last one. So we'll punt it to Kevin first. So Kevin, you mentioned some of the innovations that you're actually deploying in your data centers. Obviously, one, to reduce water burdens. What other kind of innovations are you seeing, both technological and maybe more just the policy or, other things that the state and local governments are doing to incentivize or get you there or make concessions?
Yeah, I think there's a range of things. I mean, I think one, and this kind of is almost like where innovation is really kind of evolution because the environment is changing around you. I think to some of the points that Buddy made on site selection, where maybe the locality has had areas they want data centers to locate, and then also some areas where it's like, well, it didn't, it didn't kind of play exactly how we would have loved it to play, but concrete has dried. I think the development side, the data center side, is significantly more conscious of that now. So really, there is, I'll say, an innovation in responsible development, particularly for the mature data center companies. We think about everything from sound studies at site plans to increased vegetative buffers to improved primary facades. Like, especially when you're in more of the urban and suburban areas, feeling a little more office than not. So that I think has been interesting because just from a pure real estate development perspective, I think it's helped up level the quality of thinking. It's not purely just about the facility; it's about everything, kind of all the above, which I think is great. Technically as well, I think there's a lot of innovative thinking going on right now. There's not just your cooling side, which we discussed quite a bit, which is like, well, if I want the energy efficiency of water without the constraints of availability of potable water, how do we kind of find a path there? And I think the reclaimed water is a great direction. You're seeing advancements in supporting immersive cooling technology, which I think I remember building a computer at one point, and we had you could kind of immerse the CPU in something, and that really concerned me at the time because you should not be putting electronics in liquid. It just went against everything that my kind of instinct said. But you're finding these kind of cooling efficiencies there. I do think you're seeing significant new innovative thinking around how power is supplied. There's been a lot of drumbeat of bring your own power. There's been huge conversations around co-location with generation behind the meter. And frankly, I think there's still a lot more to be thought through in that space. need drives innovation as well. And so that kind of chase for availability is starting more creative thinking on how to do some of these things. But you know, for me, I think some are great temporary solutions. I think some are maybe permanent tools to be used. But I think we're seeing a lot of innovation there. And frankly, I'm pretty excited for large scale battery storage. I think that there is something there that can really be valuable to us as customers, and also the utility and to other customers that some of the battery technology can bring. So yeah, that's a few areas that I'm excited about.
That's great. And that's sort of to you, Jacob, too. I mean, you talked about that one event. I'm sure there's other events that you're worried about that keep you up at night. Are you hoping that technology and innovations get us out of those future events? Maybe you could think through that for us.
Absolutely, Joe, and thanks for those comments, Kevin. So I mean, Eversource operates, 3 control centers. And so those types of events, definitely do. I mean, not necessarily that type of event, but system disturbances and system events do tend to keep me up at night. But for anyone who knows this topic about innovation, they know I can't get through this response without saying grid enhancing technologies or advanced transmission technologies, very popular phrases. So let me just touch on that for a second. So my slide that essentially showed that we saw the electrification load growth coming has in some ways helped, because many of our projects that Eversource, transmission projects that Eversource has constructed over the last, let's say, 5 years, have already been deploying things like high temperature, low sag, advanced transmission conductors. We've had power flow controllers that have been in operation for, I mean, some of them since the 90s. And so we are definitely looking at ways to maximize the utilization of our existing infrastructure. Why? Because there's really no other solution here. I mean, getting a new greenfield transmission right away in New England is essentially dead on arrival. And so, we pretty much have to be trying to do as much as we can with what we have. And that's why we've been investing in advanced conductors already. And so what we're seeing, so anyways, that's my segue into saying what we're seeing in a lot of these studies is the transmission capacity is not the problem. Because these advanced high temperature, low sag conductors, we're already like doubling or tripling the line's capacity from the line we're replacing to the new line, and so that's kind of already happening. So that's helping in many ways. I will say in terms of battery storage, battery storage is something that we ourselves are having to deploy. If not for any other reason, it's taking back to the material, back to some of these pieces of equipment do take a long time to source, procure, build, manufacture, deliver. And so many of our own projects that we desperately need for base load service are getting delayed due to either our own siting or material issues, et cetera. And so we are having to use our own battery storage for peak shaving, et cetera. So, I think we'll have to wait and see in terms of that technology. I kind of put microgrids. We have the nation's largest storage-only microgrid operating in Massachusetts. And so we're doing what we can from an innovations perspective. I do think also part of the other innovation, though, is really innovating on the process. And so I just want to kind of highlight that again, because back to Kevin's point, right? Like some of these existing interconnection processes were structured in a way to accommodate other things. And so, like he said, in terms of a stepped load or load schedule or operational schedules, it's like, I do believe that should be, and so it's why our process does allow for that. Not all processes do, and kind of maybe so I do think there's kind of a process kind of innovation here that can happen as well. So
Great.
Thanks for that.
All right, now we have about 5 or 10 more minutes, so I was going to open up. We have gotten one question, and it kind of addresses the affordability comments that I started on earlier, right? Obviously, we want to make sure that these utility investments that are being made are equitable and efficient in terms of the cost recovery to the ratepayers, or dare I say, the customers of the utilities, right? And so just in that process, what measures have you seen that exist among the utilities and the transmission providers to increase the transparency of those data center interconnection requests and requirements, and to reduce the speculative activity, to make sure that, that the customers at the end of the day aren't being held with a bad investment that a utility made. So what are you kind of seeing? Maybe that's open up that to everybody. Maybe not everybody at once.
I can start. I mean,
Sure.
We're not seeing a lot of speculative here. But I was in a community this weekend where they said they were having 12 gigawatts of requests. And I said, well, how many of them actually have signed an engineering agreement? And they said none. Then I said, well, then you have inquiries, you don't have requests. So, but I'd be really interested to see what Jacob has heard up in his region.
Yeah, so thanks, buddy. I mean, I'll start by just look, customer bill impacts. This is a very, very important topic, and I think for us in New England, that's why we largely have had a practice where if there's a merchant third-party generation interconnection request, they simply pay all their costs. They pay all their costs, and then but then once they're on, we don't have like a transmission access charge like some other regions do, where they have to, where those interconnected customers now have to continue to pay, and so it's kind of plug and play in that sense. And so I will say, like, I do believe we do want to insulate our kind of the traditional residential customers from these kind of costs that are largely driven by a sole interconnection customer, because I do think that the bill impacts, they are real, and so I kind of wanted to kind of emphasize that. Thanks. And in terms of like the real requests, to Buddy's question, you just asked, kind of more speculative. So we have not in New England, at least to Eversource's system, I can't speak for the other New England transmission owners, but we have not had a request that is kind of advanced past that point that Kevin said, where you can have not only large financial deposits made, sometimes depending on the terms of the agreements, those can even be non-refundable, right? So that's kind of when it gets real. We have not had. I will say though, if you're like, oh, therefore they haven't had any real projects. What I think that what we've been struggling more with is just the unique aspects of New England's grid, because a lot of the projects that have been requested kind of are like, they just it might not have been in the right area. We might have had a known voltage problem in that area, so it popped up even more problems. And so I think if we were to just get the right project in the right place, that's kind of what I think it's more about education really than anything else in New England. Thanks.
And you made a good point, right? I mean, you expect those speculative customers to kind of pay their own freight, right? So they plug and play into your system with no burden to the rate payers. So Kevin, you're up.
Yeah. So I love this question because we've been talking a lot about it internally, because we've seen a range of kind of the Baskin Robbins flavors of trying to get at this so far, and we boiled it down that we see 4 common approaches that we call the 4 C's, which if you've ever bought an engagement ring, that's cut, color, clarity, and carat. But for us, it's what we call collateral, charges, contracts, and clawbacks. So there are different flavors of each of these 4 things, but what this is setting up is really an opportunity to achieve 2 goals. Help to protect from over speculation, and also to help ensure that other ratepayers are not impacted by either speculative or just, the global economy can change right pretty quickly. So how do you protect other ratepayers? So now these 4 C's, and I'll talk through them pretty quickly. To me, it's like when the only tool you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. These are all like hammers, right? But they're kind of, elegant ways to approach each of them. So on the collateral side, what I'm talking about there is there's a growing interest either through contracts or through new tariffs to require large load requests above a certain megawattage to at ESA or electric service agreement or equivalent post a significant amount of collateral per megawatt. And there are a variety of forms of ways to post that collateral, and in some instances there are ways to not have to post collateral. You better show that you are financially worthy of that. If something goes south. So you have collateral, so that's kind of your skin in the game. Like you can't just disappear tomorrow. Kevin Hughes LLC, you can't just go bankrupt and and you have charges. So these really form in what we call minimum charges. This is signing up that once I receive service, I'm paying a minimum amount, regardless of what's metered. This is encouraging load to arrive, and it's also helping with cost recovery. Today Dominion in Virginia has minimum charge requirements at their ESAs. I want to say it's 60 or 65%. But this is a way to just ensure that you aren't sitting on that allocation of capacity and costs are being recovered. I mentioned contracts because controls around assignability of contracts matter. Again, if I'm a speculative landowner, my goal is to never ever execute that contract, or if I did, I'm never going to be the one that takes the meter. And that can be absolutely fine, but having controls in place to understand how that's working matters. That's some visibility that you need insight into. And then that last one, clawbacks. This is a concept that Stack believes if you are signing up for minimum charges, you should not have to sign up for clawbacks. But the idea there is that a utility can claw back allocated capacity if it's not utilized. My take is if I've already paid for it through minimum charges, you're clawing back something I've already paid for. But I think if there's a scenario where I'm not paying minimum charges, the idea that a utility can claw back that allocated capacity to serve others doesn't seem too wild to me. So those are our 4 C's, and that's what we've seen as common protections.
That's great. Well, we got 1 more minute, so I'm going to give you one quick question. Are you seeing any, just yes or no, any connection of large loads at the distribution level?
So I'll try to rapid fire these last two
Sure.
just to be able to address them both. My understanding, I'm not a distribution planner. My understanding is there's just physical limitations of those systems, usually around the 25 megawatt size. So we do have data centers that are much, much smaller that are interconnected to our distribution system. I probably should have said that, but those are, smaller in nature. And then in terms of the 5 gigawatts, what's the average size? This is a fascinating question. I would say the average size is in the 400 to 500 megawatt range, which is really big for New England. Thanks.
Thank you.
Well,
Jacob nailed the first one.
Yeah, I think we're at time. So I know this conversation could go on much longer. So a couple things I'll ask for all of you. Please join us in the future. We are planning on having another one in late May. And so I also put the link to our webinar series in the chat. So please check that out and reach out to me directly or to any of my colleagues, Kirsten or Camille. I want to thank our speakers, Joe, Buddy, Kevin, and Jacob, for a fantastic discussion. As I said, this could have gone on much longer, but I really appreciate your time. And thanks to all of you who participated in this discussion. And if you have any questions, for those of you who are listening who didn't have a chance to ask questions, reach out to us directly and we can convey that to our expert panel. So thank you all very much.